Angel. This is part 2 about vaccine. Okay, the doctor will explain. Okay, so about long COVID. Okay, and also some medicine that they use. Okay, some simple explanation. Okay, you watch it. Okay, okay, there, our friend Tucker Carlson. Okay, let's watch it. Okay, okay. Part 2. Okay, watch it.
New way of conducting commerce by connecting you with over 80,000 small businesses that may share your values. Feels good to put your money where your values are. Learn more at publicsquare.com. Why do you think all these people are dying?
From the vaccine?
Yeah.
Now we're going to get sciencey.
But why do they, I understand everything you're saying, and I'm trying to be compassionate, and I've been misled many times in my life, and so people can be misled, of course.
Yeah.
But if you have a massive rise in life insurance claims and group policies, even I understand that is, wait, slow down, what's going on? How do they account for that?
They don't know about that. They don't know about that. I mean, I would say things have changed in the last few months. So since August, myself and my writing partner, Mary Beth Pfeiffer, really terrific investigative journalist who first wrote a book looking into chronic Lyme disease. She's done great work throughout COVID, and she and I have now written 3 op-eds in USA Today, Newsweek, and then a couple of weeks ago, The Hill. And each op-ed is a little bit more, it's calling attention to all of the excess death, like why is our government, our public health agencies not doing anything about this? I mean, they literally have one job, which is to protect public health.
Yes!
And they're sitting on an unprecedented surge in dying of Americans, the youngest and healthiest of Americans, and they seem to not be questioning that. And so we are trying to call attention to that. And I would say the last one that got published in The Hill, that seemed to create a little bit of a news cycle. You know, I was on Fox with Laura Ingraham. I think she was interested in learning more about this. And we've seen that, there's a little bit of social media traction, but there's no official governmental recognition. Now, they've put out papers showing that they're aware of the mortality, but no follow-up. Or they'll give a list of reasons, right? Like the list of reasons, well, they don't always get as ridiculous as global warming, but they get close. Just trying to explain away this sudden surge in death, and it can't be done.
So what is the CDC, for example, or the federal government more broadly doing for the vaccine injured?
Very, very little. I'll give you an example. So remember, there is no such thing as vaccine injury syndrome, although I specialize and I have a whole practice which focuses on it. It's all long COVID. So let's just pretend that they're studying vaccine injury with long COVID. $1.2 billion has been dedicated to funding long COVID research. This is as of 2 months ago. Only 4 trials were set up to enroll patients. Only 1 trial was ready to enroll patients, and that was a trial studying Paxlovid. Paxlovid. If anyone could ever tell me one rational reason why that would work in long COVID, I'm all ears. There's no justifiable rationale for why you would study Paxlovid. Now, why you would want to study Paxlovid, that I can easily answer. It's a very profitable drug for a certain pharmaceutical company, but literally we're 3 years into the pandemic. We don't have like a really good response into studying and treating long COVID. Instead, it's me and a whole network of colleagues and my organization that are really sharing experiences, insights into pathophysiology. We're doing reviews of like a lot of basic science studies showing us what the mechanisms of injury are from the spike protein, from the virus, from the vaccine, and we're trying to marshal mechanistic therapies. But like, it's like we're out here in the Wild West doing it on our own, and it's really a shame because it doesn't have to be this way.
This is not what you signed up for when you became a physician.
No, I was a system physician. I was embedded in that system. Like I told you, I was I believed in the journals. I taught what I was taught. I believed all vaccines were safe. I never questioned vaccines. So
why do you think, and I think you speak for the overwhelming majority of Americans, when you think our basics, we've got flaky politicians or weird seasons, but the systems, the institutions that make this not third world are totally sound. I think everyone thought that. I thought that. But why, what about you allowed you to see what was happening and be honest about it? Why not everyone else?
Well, I've always questioned orthodoxy, especially in medicine. Like from early on when I was a doctor, when I would come in, and especially after I got some training, and I would come into new ICU or new hospital, and I'd see like how they were treating, for instance, like kidney injury, and I'd be like, "That's weird. That's like data from 15 years ago. Like, why aren't we doing it this way? We now know this, this, and this." And that could apply to almost any disease, heart failure, heart attacks. I mean, I knew there was evidence showing more insight and more effective therapies, but yeah, we were doing stuff in the past. And I just think change in medicine comes very slowly, and I was always an early adopter. I like to study new novel therapies, and so I was actually, I talked about Paul Marik. I was celebrated in my specialty, pretty well known nationally and even internationally, because I was a pioneer in a field called critical care ultrasonography. And the textbook that I was the senior editor of is like one of the best-selling textbooks in that field around the world. It's 7 languages, and so I taught for years around the country doctors this new skill on how to use ultrasound to make life-saving diagnoses, like critically ill, patients crashing. You put a probe on their chest, you could see what their heart was doing, the right ventricle, left ventricle, the lungs were full of fluid. So it was this huge, it changed my life when I learned ultrasound. I felt like I was a super doctor, like a doctor with superpowers, and I tried to teach those powers, and it became standard of care. Now there's not an ICU in the country that doesn't have an ultrasound machine in it. Most critical care doctors now get trained. There's certification exams that you can do, and that's what I did for most of my career. And I got interested in something called therapeutic hypothermia, which is how to treat patients after cardiac arrest with brain injury. And so I'll just finish by saying when COVID came, I was like, game on. I mean, I was 50 years old. I'm a pulmonary critical care physician. I saw pulmonary critical care disease literally enveloping the world. And I think innately just committed to learning everything I could to figure out how to treat it. And I had some giants around me. I had Paul Marik around me. I had Umberto Meduri around me, Joe Ferrone, and Jose Iglesias. That's kind of the 5 ICU docs that started our organization. And all we did was read papers and the emails, like preprint servers, and the papers that we're reading, and then we were fashioning protocols, and we were learning stuff that worked and what didn't, and it was this frenetic push, and it's something that they should have done that at the government level. Had like a group of committed frontline clinicians have a seat at the table. No clinician has ever been given a seat at the table. No real frontline.
By clinician, you mean a doctor who treats patients?
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean by clinician.
Yeah.
Someone who is literally immersed in patient care. Now, you have people in those 3-letter agencies who, yes, they'll see patients on the side most of the time in specialty offices. They weren't deluged seeing like these acutely ill COVID patients to the hundreds, if not thousands. And I was seeing them not only at the most severe stages of the game in the ICU, but also as an outpatient. And so I had a wealth of experience and insight into the disease and how to treat it. No one ever asked us. And whenever I would try to bring out my insights, it seemed to get attacked. So
what did you think of for a while, my impression is that the putting people in respirators was part of the protocol.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's a little bit of it's definitely more nuanced than that. But I would say this: the push to put someone on a ventilator, they probably did it too early as a rule early on. I think a few things drove that. It was ignorance of the disease, the trajectory of the disease. I think there's a little bit of fear around controlling infections. So that definitely, I think ventilators were overused. But that wasn't, in my opinion, the main problem. The main problem was that we were not treating. We were literally saying supportive care only. This is the first year where, fluids for hydration, nutrition, oxygen, Tylenol for fever. That's what's called supportive care.
I could do that at my house.
Yeah, you could. But that seemed to be our response. And like Paul says, my partner, he says, there is no disease you cannot treat. And there's really simple stuff that we knew that would help fortify immune systems and help protect against severe disease that we thought that are super safe, that on a risk-benefit precautionary principle, we should have, as a rule, just recommended. Vitamin D for one. We should add a vitamin D, supplementation campaign nationwide. Would have been very easy to do. Now, as an aside, vitamin D has been one of the most attacked substances over the last 3 or 4 decades by the pharmaceutical industry.
Why?
It threatens the disease model. I mean, we can do an hour on vitamin D, Tucker, but
vitamin D like in milk?
Yes, like vitamin D, like it's vitamin D is a whole other discussion, but they're terrified of vitamin D. Our normal
Can I say, if you find yourself terrified of vitamins, you're probably on the wrong side.
Exactly. You're probably on the wrong side. Yeah, there you go. I think you got it. But yeah, no, it's you know, I wrote a book called The War on Ivermectin, and the genesis of that book not only is my expertise on ivermectin and my vast clinical experience, but and I told the story before, but I got an email during this journey from a guy named William B. Grant. He's a professor out in California. And he wrote to me this email just one day. My life was going totally sideways because our protocols focused on ivermectin. I was using it a lot in my practice, as were tens of thousands of doctors around the world, to really good benefits. And I was getting attacked. There was hit jobs in the media. And he wrote me this email one day and he said, "Dear Dr. Corey, what they're doing to ivermectin, they've been doing to vitamin D for decades," and included a link to an article called The Disinformation Playbook. And it's got 5 tactics, and these are the 5 tactics that all industries employ when science emerges that's inconvenient to their interest. And so I'm just going to give you an example. Ivermectin science was extremely inconvenient to the interests of the pharmaceutical industrial complex. I mean, it threatened the vaccine campaign, it threatened vaccine hesitancy, which was public enemy number one. We know that everything, all the propaganda and censorship was literally going after something called vaccine hesitancy.
Yes.
They're trying to
I experienced vaccine hesitancy myself.
It's a terrible condition, or life-saving.
I'm so grateful for it.
It could be a life-saving condition, but they deployed this information, and I didn't understand what was going on, Tucker, because when for instance, I gave testimony in a Senate hearing for the first time in May of 2020, had nothing to do with ivermectin. I just said that it was critically important that corticosteroids be used in the hospital phase of the disease. I was attacked widely for saying that, even by my own university. They did not want me talking to the press. And that was based on the expert opinion of my group. Umberto Maduri was one of them, like I said, one of the world experts in lung injury and corticosteroids, myself and Paul. And we were validated there, because 2 months later, a trial came out of Oxford showing that huge mortality reductions when you use corticosteroids. And now it's the standard of care worldwide. 6 months later, I go back. Now I'm an expert at an early treatment drug, which is ivermectin, do the same testimony. It goes viral on a Fox News website, which was the most watched, got up to 9 million views, and then it was taken down in the middle of the night. And this is before the fraudulent trials which showed that it supposedly didn't work. So they had no data to show that it didn't work. All the data showed that it worked. Now they changed that equation using disinformation, but the point is I couldn't figure out, like I gave that testimony, the Associated Press did a hit job on me within 2 days. They sent a reporter. I buried her with all this data, all these trials, all these health ministries, in South America and other places that were literally obliterating COVID. And she wrote an article about how it's another drug to be debunked, like hydroxychloroquine. And then she even wrote about some couple who drank like a fish cleaner or something like that. This was in an article interviewing me about ivermectin. It turned into this. We actually filed an ethics complaint. This is how naive I was at the time. This is almost 2 years ago, or over 2 years ago. We filed an ethics complaint with the Associated Press. We were so disturbed by this article. We didn't know that the fix was in. But the point of that story is, when he sent me the article, the link to that article, I read it, and it was like my mind exploded. I suddenly saw the world differently, because every tactic that they described, I had a dozen examples of in relation to ivermectin and even hydroxychloroquine. And so I saw that myself and our organization were literally like the Bad News Bears, fighting like a war, a global disinformation campaign, trying to destroy early effective treatment drugs in order to prop up this vaccine campaign. It's craziness. That's my life.
So, but what you're really saying is that the drug companies applied pressure to the medical establishment to withhold life-saving treatment so that people would have no option but the vaccine.
Differently, I think all of it starts at the level of the medical journals, because once you have something established in the medical journals as let's say, a proven fact or a generally accepted consensus comes out of the journals. So I think that's the core of the corruption. And in fact, in my book, I document very well, in particular, just using the example of ivermectin. It does not have to be about ivermectin, but I have dozens of rejection letters from investigators around the world who did good trials on ivermectin, tried to publish it. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. And then the ones that do get in all purportedly prove that ivermectin didn't work. So, and then when you look at the ones that actually got in, and this is where like probably my biggest estrangement and why I don't recognize science and don't trust it anymore, is the trials that flew to publication in the top journals of the world were so brazenly manipulated and corrupted in the design and conduct, and many of us wrote about it, but they flew to publication. And then every time they were published, you saw these huge PR campaigns in the media, New York Times, Boston Globe, LA Times, ivermectin doesn't work, latest high quality rigorous study says. I'm sitting here in my office watching these lies just ripple throughout the media sphere based on fraudulent studies published in the top journals. And that has changed. That's why I say I'm estranged and I don't know what to trust anymore.
You speak for so many, but you speak from obviously a much deeper reservoir of knowledge when you say that, which makes it even more upsetting.
Listen, paying $14.99 a month for a streaming app and $9.99 a month for a music app and
Is there hope for reform?
At the medical journal level, I don't know. I think that's a complex topic, although I don't want to get political here, but I did listen to an interview with Bobby Kennedy, and I heard this, I'd never forgot it, because to me, it spoke to my heart, but he said if he were to ever become president, one of his first orders of business would to call into the Oval Office the chief editors of all the top journals and tell them, clean up your act, or I'm going after you with RICO statute, as a racketeering organization, which is interesting because the name of the chapter, there's a chapter in my book called The Editorial Mafia. And so when I heard that Bobby Kennedy was going to bring these guys in the Oval Office and threaten them with RICO, statute, I was like, oh, he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what the problem is and what to do about it. So, but as far as reform, going back to maybe this current issue that you kind of invited me to talk about, right? Which is this just unprecedented excess mortality that we're observing, not only in this country, right? I don't know if you follow, but the UK, there's a couple of brave politicians there trying to bring this issue to the forefront. Australia, Canada, a lot of the advanced health economies of the world are seeing really large and unexplained excess mortalities, even as COVID has waned in severity. But in order to address this, I mean, first of all, this is the clearest indictment of our public health agencies, which is just their inaction. The knowledge that this is occurring and they're not doing anything tells you that they have failed. It is the most clear evidence that they have failed and are failing. If they were functioning, this would be a major public health initiative. There would be lots of funding. You'd have tons of studies looking at causes. And these studies are easy, by the way, because they could do one thing that no one has done in advanced health economics, which is give us open source, rigorous data of vaccination status and outcomes. We want to know who's unvaccinated, who's vaccinated, and how they're doing. And they try to avoid doing that. So that there are solutions to doing it, but I think you need people free of conflicts. I think we need like industry to get involved, not just the academics and the agency folks. But like, for instance, get someone whose conflicts of interest would promote study like this, like the insurance industry. They are looking into a shellacking. They are getting hammered. Look at how much they're paying out. And you can see it in some of the industry trade magazines. They literally have never paid out this much money. And keep in mind, you pay out a policy on a 32-year-old. How much money have you lost compared to when you pay one out on a 58-year-old?
Exactly.
And so
a 78.
And there is a collaborative of insurance guys that I've worked with. And by the way, I was on a call a year and a half ago. I was invited to present data to a group from a whole bunch of different life insurance companies. Almost all of them had their cameras off and almost none said anything. I would say about 30 people on the call, only 2 people actually had their cameras off and were asking detailed questions. But they showed up. And I found out from the guys who organized it that many of them were like under the CEO. It wasn't the CEO showing up, but they sent someone there to listen. And so they're well aware of this. And if you think about the insurance industry, right, how much they've done to protect the health of the country, again, in their interest, but like automobile safety with seatbelts, right, fire codes, electrical codes, nautical, building, right, all of those things, obviously it protects their business, but it also protects our health. And I would just like to see maybe someone who's interested in finding out the answer why everyone's dying. I mean, I think that industry wants to know that answer more than any other, and they have the resources to do it. But I think government and other medical experts need to help, and they need to be of a diverse spectrum and transparent.
Such a wise point. So I just want to end by hearing what you are seeing in your clinical practice now with the vaccine injured. And I think it's important that people hear it because everybody knows somebody. I know a couple of people, but it's sort of hard to know. Like, what are we looking at? What are you seeing?
So this is how I divide, this is just kind of my perception of vaccine injury, is that when I use the term vaccine injury, I'm usually referring to what I call a single organ problem, like pericarditis, myocarditis, stroke, something like that, an autoimmune disease. What I specialize in my practice is I treat patients with what we call long COVID, long vax. It's the same disease, just different triggers, right? One is triggered by COVID, the other one is triggered by the spike protein from the vaccine. Much more common is long vax. The only real differences between the two conditions is that the vaccinated are on average sicker and more disabled than the long COVIDs, with some pretty prominent exceptions to that. But the point I want to kind of give you, Tucker, is that the disease, although it has a new name, long COVID, it's not a new disease. It's been around for decades, and it's traditionally been called myalgic encephalitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, which MECFS. You've heard of CFS?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's effectively what long COVID and long vax is, because the hallmarks of that disease is a new inexorable fatigue, what's called post-exertional malaise, which means when they try to do even simple activities,
Yes.
they pay for it in terms of fatigue.
Yeah, they're enervated. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like a classic example. I give one of my patients, like he'd go to his mailbox to get the mail from the curb, come back into his house, and he'd be in bed for 2 hours. Like that's classic post-exertional malaise. And then the third is what we call brain fog, which is some amount of cognitive limitation. But that triad, that is MECFS. And that's always been associated with infections, things like Epstein-Barr virus. But the difference now is the rate at which it occurs with coronavirus and this spike protein and this vaccine is so high that, like I said, just me and my partner alone manage over 1,200 patients, and they're mostly disabled.
And because there was some debate about whether chronic fatigue syndrome had psychiatric origins or physical origins.
I think that's always been a debate, and that's always been a problem for that disease.
Yeah.
And that's why there's very little to show for it in terms of great studies. About the only thing they know about how to approach that disease is you tell patients to pace themselves, to stay under that
Right.
exertional limit that makes them sicker. And pacing is a good part of what we do, but we've learned lots of different therapies. But what makes our kind of plight easier is that we're learning so much about the pathophysiology of the spike protein and what it does to the body and all of the disturbances that it causes, that because we know it's the spike causing it here, so I don't have to worry that it's some psychiatric illness or depression or something in the environment. Like I know what it is. It's the spike protein. And I'm learning a lot about the spike protein, what it does to the body. And then we choose medicines whose pharmacologic mechanism of action best counteract those disturbances in pathophysiology. And we have a lot of success, but I will tell you, nothing works in everybody. It's really a trial and error system. We use our most frequently effective medicines first, and then I have second, third, fourth, fifth line, and I have things where like I'm trialing new things. You have to do it. The patients are suffering immeasurably, and
so they're tired and
tired,
out of
foggy, can't do very much. Many of them are housebound, so some start bedbound, some are housebound. Some can go out for short excursions, but most of them are nowhere near living the life they used to live.
So what happens to their relationships?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't seen, to be honest, it's a cool question because I've thought about that myself. I've seen some decimated people, and by and large, I can't think of an example, their partners have stayed with them. Their partners have supported them. I've seen a lot of love and devotion, at least in my patient population, that I kind of wonder when that's going to be, when some partner is going to say, you're not who I married, I'm not happy, and leave them in illness, which is what you're not supposed to do in the marriage vows. But I haven't seen that very much. But clearly their relationships are affected. The partner also suffers. The partner can't go out to dinner with them. They can't go see a ball game. They can't go on the trips they used to go on. And so they're all leading different lives, but I've seen a lot of partner support and commitment.
If you knew that your life had been completely destroyed, you couldn't work, you couldn't even go out to dinner because you were forced to take a vaccine and no one ever apologized or stood up to help you, How angry would you be?
The amount of anger it's incalculable. The patients that I see, they are equal parts angry. I think wrongly they feel ashamed because they were duped. You know, they did something. Many of them were actually kind of reluctant because those are the worst. They really didn't want to. They pushed back a little, tried not to, and then finally succumbed because their livelihood was on the line, and then they got injured. And those are the ones who kicked them. So there's a lot of regret, shame, anger, and then some of them, there's also a lot of, they're injured, they're sick, but they're active in vaccine injury groups. They try to share their experiences with things that have helped them. They advocate, they reach out to their politicians, trying to bring this more to common knowledge. And so...
but they have no power. There's nothing they can do, right? They can't sue Pfizer.
Nope, not yet.
So I know someone, I have a close friend who was forced to take the vaccine and has been sick ever since, 2.5 years, all the time. COVID repeatedly. And all kinds of, every flu, I'm assuming
that's part of what can happen. My patients, it's not so much the immunosuppression, it's really that CFS component that I see, the chronic daily symptoms. So it's the triad that I talked about, which is fatigue, post-exertion malaise, brain fog. And then next on the list is neuropathies. So sensory neuropathies, just such high rates. So burning, tingling, pins and needles, and odd distributions, odd times a day, different severities. Many people are burning or numb or they feel pain.
What is that?
It's what's called a small fiber neuropathy. So it's the tiny nerve endings that infiltrate our skin, and they got inflamed or damaged. I think some of it's probably autoimmune, some of it's probably from microcirculatory problems, something called microclotting. I don't want to get too sciencey if you don't want me to, Tucker, but it's small fiber neuropathy is very high rates, and then equally incident is something called dysautonomia or POTS, where resting heart rates are like 110, where like you have these fit people who are exercising, they enjoy their resting heart rate of a 60, right? When those of us who fit, when we have those, now they're sitting in a chair that's 95, 100, they go walk to the bathroom, it's 140, or they get up suddenly, their blood pressure drops, and it's basically the small nerve fibers that control constriction of blood vessels and control our heart rates are all off. And so when you try to do some activity and your blood pressure is not appropriate for the activity, the heart rate's not appropriate for the activity, good luck doing that activity. And that's another thing that drives...
That seems like a stroke risk.
If it's severe enough, it could be, but no, generally the stroke's not what causes that, but a lot of dysfunction, a lot of fatigue, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. I have skin manifestations, different GI things. Because the other thing, remember, a lot of our GI system is autonomic as well, right? Peristalsis, gastric emptying. You don't think about that. That's all supposed to be under the control of the body. And now the small fibers aren't telling you to propel the food down your intestine or to empty the stomach. And so many of them have lots of food intolerances. It ramps up allergies. I see patients who could tolerate every food and everything. Then they, after the vaccine, suddenly complain of immense amount of allergies to things. I could go an hour with what I see. It's so broad, so vast. It's an immensely complex disease. I will say most of the time it's satisfying to treat because I would say the vast majority, if not all of our patients, get better to some extent. The problem is it's the minority that we get back to baseline, a distinct small minority. The vast majority, modest to large improvements, and then I have a cohort which I really, even after a year now, I'm having difficulty helping appreciably.
At what point does this end?
Well, if you look back at papers on ME/CFS, they say that in their lifetime, only 5% ever get back to baseline. And so for most, with the chronic form that I see, it's accepting a new life and set level of functioning.
For people who are watching this and want to learn more about what you're doing and more information on this, feel like they might fall into these categories, where would they go?
So first is my organization, so flccc.net. We have protocols, so we have sort of recommendations of things that we find are helpful for treating vaccine injury, long COVID or long vax. We also have it on treatment of various